Good evening. A reading from Matthew. Then Jesus went with them to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." He took with him Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee and began to be grieved and agitated. Then he said to them, "My soul is deeply grieved, even to death. Remain here and stay awake with me." And going a little farther, he threw himself on the ground and prayed, "My Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me, yet not what I want, but what you want." Then he came to the disciples and found them sleeping, and he said to Peter, "So could you not stay awake with me 1 hour? Stay awake and pray that you may not come into the time of trial. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak." Again he went away for the 2nd time and prayed, My Father, if this cannot pass unless I drink it, your will be done." Again he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were heavy. So leaving them again, he went away and prayed for the third time, saying the same words. Then he came to the disciples and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and taking your rest? Now the hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Get up, let us be going. Look, my betrayer is at hand."
Continuing in Matthew, while he was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, arrived. With him was a large crowd with swords and clubs from the chief priest and the elders of the people. Now the betrayer had given them a sign saying, "The one I will kiss is the man. Arrest him." At once he came up to Jesus and says, "Greetings, Rabbi," and kissed him. Jesus said to him, "Friend, do what you are here to do." Then they came and laid hands on Jesus and arrested him. Suddenly one of those with Jesus put his hand on his sword, drew it, and struck the slave of the high priest, cutting off his ear. Then Jesus said to him, "Put your sword back into its place, for all who take the sword will die by the sword. Do you think that I cannot appeal to my Father, and he will once send me more than 12 legions of angels? But how then would the scriptures be fulfilled, which say it must happen in this way?" At that hour, Jesus said to the crowds, "Have you come out with swords and clubs to arrest me as though I were a rebel? Day after day I sat in the temple teaching, and you did not arrest me. But all this has taken place so that the scriptures of the prophets may be fulfilled." Then all the disciples deserted him and fled.
I served an unapproachable God. While I served the high priest that served an unapproachable God. But everything changed in that one night. Everything changed in one night. I was drugged to the garden, and then my ear... I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up. I was there in the garden with Judas. Judas knew exactly where Jesus was going to be, and we were all there waiting for him. It was crazy that night. His disciples were with him, but I saw Jesus. I was very close to Jesus, and you could tell he was visibly upset. And Judas kisses Jesus on the cheek, and I was standing so close that I heard Jesus call Judas friend. And that's the last thing I heard, because moments later I heard nothing. I saw the flash of a blade come toward my face, and I felt blood streaming down, and then it got quiet. And then I got dizzy, and then Jesus, he touched me. Like I said, I heard all the stories about Jesus, and I've heard all the stories about how Jesus healed people with his hands. There was this one time he healed a person with dirt and spit. And so many people, he just healed them with his hands, but it wasn't his hands for me. It was the way he looked at me. It was his eyes. That's what broke me. His eyes were filled with compassion and grief and joy. And when he pulled his hand away, my ear, that night, everything I heard about that man had changed forever. They had a mock trial for him. The whole night was just set up to condemn him. And he didn't say a word. He just felt sorry for us. There was the sentencing, there was Pilate, the crucifixion, and then there was an earthquake. And then the veil. I was in the temple. When the veil was ripped in half. Do you know what that means? I mean, even I knew what that meant. God had invited us all in. The unapproachable God was now approachable. God was on the move.
Jesus stands before the high priest. Those who had arrested Jesus took him to Caiaphas, the high priest, where the scribes and the elders had gathered. But Peter was following him at a distance, as far as the courtyard of the high priest. And going inside, he sat with the guards in order to see how this would end. Now the chief priests and the whole council were looking for false testimony against Jesus so that they might put him to death. But they found none, though many false witnesses came forward. At last, two came forward and said, "This fellow said, 'I am able to destroy the temple of God and to build it in 3 days.'" The high priest stood up and said, "Have you no answer? What is it that they testify against you?" But Jesus was silent. Then the high priest said to him, "I put you under oath before the living God. Tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God." Jesus said to him, "You have said so. But I tell you, from now on you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven." Then the high priest tore his clothes and said, "He has blasphemed. Why do we still need witnesses? You have now heard his blasphemy. What do you think?" They answered, "He deserves death." Then they spat in his face and struck him, and some slapped him, saying, "Prophesy to us, you Messiah. Who is it that struck you?"
Denies Jesus. Now Peter was sitting outside in the courtyard. A female servant came to him and said, "You also were with Jesus the Galilean." But he denied it before all of them, saying, I do not know what you are talking about." When he went out to the porch, another female servant saw him, and she said to the bystanders, "This man was with Jesus the Nazarene." Again, he denied it with an oath, "I do not know the man." After a little while, the bystanders came up and said to Peter, "Certainly you are also one of them, for your accent betrays you." Then he began to curse, and he swore an oath, "I do not know the man." At that moment, the cock crowed. Then Peter remembered what Jesus had said, "Before the cock crows, you will deny me 3 times." And he went out and wept bitterly.
They say a rooster crowing is God's wake-up call. Yeah, that's at least that's the way it was for me. Everything that whole night was a blur, all right? I didn't comprehend, none of us could comprehend everything that was going on, all right? We were all in the upper room, Jesus was washing our feet, then we were in the garden, Jesus goes off to pray by himself. I fell asleep. I'm not proud of it. I had a big meal. Bread makes me sleepy. Next thing we know, me, James, and John, Jesus is in our face, and he's trying to wake us up, and he said, the flesh is weak, the spirit is willing, and then before we know it, Judas is kissing Jesus on the cheek. I try to go help him. I cut off this guard's ear. For the record, I wasn't aiming for his ear. I'm a fisherman, not a swordsman. And then they arrest Jesus, and they take him off, and we ran. And it wasn't but 2 hours earlier that we were in the upper room. I was looking at him. I was looking him right in the eye saying, "If everyone disowns you, Jesus, I won't. I'm with you. I love you." And I think that's what made me stop, turn around, go back. And I caught a glimpse of Jesus as they were taking him to the high priest's house. Stood at the gate, and some girl comes up to me, starts pointing at me, starts going, you're with him. You're with this man that claims to be the Son of God. You're one of his disciples. I felt like every eye was on me. So I just brushed her off. I said, "You don't know what you're talking about. You got the wrong guy." I get my way into the courtyard, and it's cold. I try to warm up by the fire. And then there's this guard that recognizes me, and he is from the ear incident, and starts going, get him, he's with him, just arrest him, get him. And I'm like, "You don't know what you're talking about, all right? I wasn't with him." It was easier the second time to deny him. It was sometime right before morning, and this wise guy, he comes up to me and goes, "Who you kidding, all right? Who you fooling? You're with him. I can tell by your accent." I'm like, "This is just the way I talk, all right?" And the whole night, they kept pushing him around. They kept beating him. They kept spitting on him, throwing insults at him, and I couldn't take it anymore. I had enough. I was tired of people accusing me, looking at me, and I said a few things that I'm not proud of, but I was like, "Leave him alone. You don't know what you're doing, all right? Just leave him alone. I wasn't with him." And that's when I heard the most blood-curdling sound I ever heard in my whole life. I heard that rooster crow. And at that moment, Jesus, he turns around and he looks at me. He looks at me. And his gaze, you can't escape his gaze. I mean, when his eyes are on you, you cannot escape it. And they arrested him and they took him off. I will die with you, Jesus. If everybody disowns you, I will die with you. What a joke. I mean, what would you do? At that moment, at that time, I ran. I ran so fast, I ran so long. And you know what they did? They killed him. He's dead.
Jesus stands before Pilate. When morning came, all the chief priests and the elders of the people conferred together against Jesus in order to bring about his death. They bound him, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate, the governor. When Judas, his betrayer, saw that Jesus was condemned, he repented and brought back the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and the elders. He said, I have sinned by betraying innocent blood. But they said, what is that to us? See to it yourself. Throwing down the pieces of silver in the temple, he departed and he went and hanged himself. But the chief priests, taking the silver, said, it is not lawful to put them in the treasury, since they are blood money. After conferring together, they used them to buy the potter's field as a place to bury foreigners. For this reason, that field has been called the field of blood to this day. Then was fulfilled what had been spoken through the prophet Jeremiah. And they took the 30 pieces of silver, the price of the one of whom a price had been set, on whom some of the people of Israel had set a price, and they gave them to the potter's field, as the Lord commanded me. Now Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, are you the king of the Jews? Jesus says, you say so. But when he was accused by the chief priests and elders, he did not answer. Then Pilate said to him, do you not hear how many accusations they make against you? But he gave him no answer, not even to a single charge, so that the governor was greatly amazed. Now at the festival, the governor was accustomed to release a prisoner for the crowd, anyone whom they wanted. At that time, they had a notorious prisoner called Jesus Barabbas. So after they had gathered, Pilate said to them, whom do you want me to release for you, Jesus Barabbas or Jesus who is called the Messiah? For he realized that it was out of his jealousy that they had handed him over. While he was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent word to him, have nothing to do with that innocent man, for today I have suffered a great deal because of a dream about him. Now the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowds to ask for Barabbas and to have Jesus killed. The governor again said to him, which of the two do you want me to release for you? And they said, Barabbas. Pilate said to them, then what should I do with Jesus, who is called the Messiah? All of them said, let him be crucified. Then he asked, why? What evil has he done? But they shouted all the more, let him be crucified.
Jesus is handed over to the crowd. So when Pilate saw that he could do nothing, but rather that a riot was beginning, he took some water and washed his hands before the crowd, saying, "I am innocent of this man's blood. See to it yourselves." Then the people as a whole answered, "His blood be on us and on our children." So he released Barabbas for them, and after flogging Jesus, he handed him over to be crucified. As the Roman governor, Pilate had the last word. He could have saved Jesus if he'd wanted to, and all indications are that for various reasons, that's what he'd like to have done. In the first place, after personally interrogating him, he decided that no wrong had been done and said so. "I find no crime in this man," he told the chief priests. Maybe Pilate had committed some religious faux pas in their eyes, but the religion of the Jews was nothing to him, and he couldn't have cared less. In fact, as a sophisticated Roman, religion in general was not his cup of tea, and he'd been quite frank about it when he interviewed Jesus. When Jesus told him he'd come to bear witness to the truth, Pilate's reply was, "What is truth?" Truth was for people who had time to worry about truth. Pilate was a busy man. In the second place, on the basis of a troubling dream she'd had, Pilate's wife begged him to have nothing to do with that righteous man. And sophisticated or not sophisticated, that gave him pause. In the third place, his primary job as a colonial administrator was to keep peace at any price. And the last thing he wanted to do was to stir up a hornet's nest by making a martyr out of some local hero. Nevertheless, when it became clear that he would stir up an even nastier hornet's nest by setting the man free, and when, in addition to that, the crowd pointed out that no friend of Caesar's would ever be soft on a man who had set himself up as a rival to Caesar, Pilate prudently gave in to the pressures and said to go ahead and crucify him if that's what they had their hearts set on. To make it perfectly clear that he wanted no part in their dirty business, he said, "I am innocent of this man's blood." And as a dramatic gesture that not even the dullest colonial clod among them could fail to understand, stepped out in front of the crowd and went through a ritual hand washing in a basin of water that was filled especially for that purpose. And in a sense, he was right. Insofar as Pilate had done all he could to save Jesus, even offering to let the crowd crucify Barabbas instead, the crucifixion took place against his advice and better judgment. In one sense, Pilate was like another famous hand washer, Lady Macbeth. In another sense, he was not. Unlike Pilate, Lady Macbeth had committed murder, and what she kept trying to wash away in her sleep, long after her hands were clean, was a tormenting sense of guilt over the terrible things she had done. She never succeeded, of course, but God is merciful, and one can hope that in the long run, God forgave her. Pilate's case is different and worse. For him, it was not so much the terrible thing he'd done as the good thing he'd proved incapable of doing. He could have resisted the pressure that was put on him by the enemies of Jesus. He could have spared Jesus' life. Or, if that is asking too much, he could have at least spared him the scourging and the catcalls and the horrific way he died. Or, if that was asking too much, perhaps he could have spoken a word of comfort when there was nobody else in the world with either a chance or the courage to speak it. But he didn't do it. And on that basis alone, you can almost believe the legend is true, that again and again his body rises to the surface of a mountain lake and goes through the motion of washing its hands as he tries to cleanse himself, not of something he'd done for which God could forgive him, but of something he might have done but didn't, for which he could never forgive himself.
Jesus wears a crown of thorns. Then Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged, and the soldiers wove a crown of thorns and put it on his head, and they dressed him in a purple robe. They kept coming up to him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews," and striking him on the face. Pilate went out again and said to them, "Look, I am bringing him out to you to let you know that I find no case against him." So Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. Pilate said to them, "Behold the man." When the chief priests and the police saw him, they shouted, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and crucify him. I find no case against him."
Jesus is mocked. Then the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the governor's headquarters, and they gathered the whole cohort around him. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him. And after twisting some thorns into a crown, they put it on his head. They put a reed in his right hand and knelt before him and mocked him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" They spat on him and took the reed and struck him on the head. After mocking him, they stripped him of the robe and put his own clothes on him. Then they led him away to crucify him.
Simon carries the cross. As they went out, they came upon a man from Cyrene named Simon. They compelled this man to carry his cross.
I was going into the city to celebrate the Passover, and he was being led out of the city as a Passover lamb. But we didn't understand that. When I got to Jerusalem, it wasn't what I expected. There was like 10 times more people there than the last time that I'd been there to celebrate Passover, and it just seemed like the whole city was angry, like just mobs of angry people. And all of a sudden this guard, the soldier, he grabs me. I mean, he literally just pulls me out of the crowd, and he says, for me to carry this guy's cross. If this guy's blood gets on me, it stains me, and I can't celebrate the Passover. That's the whole reason I was there. It was hard to see the man through the blood. And then our eyes met. And I knew this man was not a liar. He was not a crazy man with grand ideas. He was the Messiah. I carried what I could, but he carried most of it. We began to walk. I heard the insults that they shouted at him and now at me. I felt the spit. I felt his blood on me. They'd taken a crown made of thorns, and then they smashed it on his head, and blood ran into his eyes. They laid him out on a cross, and they nailed his hands and his feet to it, and they lifted it up, and he had all of his weight on that one spike through his feet, and he would push up with all of his might and gasp for a breath to stay alive. And I couldn't watch it. He did that for hours. I couldn't watch it. And I looked down, and I remember seeing my hands. My hands were stained with his blood, the blood that I thought would make me unclean. And I realized it's the blood that makes me clean. He breathed his last breath, and he died. And that was the day that I helped Jesus carry That was the day that I helped Jesus carry my cross. He hung and died on my cross.
Jesus speaks to the women. A great number of the people followed him, and among them were women who were beating their breasts and wailing for him. But Jesus turned to them and said, "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. For the days are surely coming when they will say, 'Blessed are the barren, and the wombs that never bore, and the breasts that never nursed.' Then they will begin to say to the mountains, 'Fall on us,' and to the hills, 'Cover us.' For if they do this when the wood is green, what will happen when it is dry?" The pitiful Savior. Whether intentionally or not, the way we depict the passion of Jesus, particularly the scene at the cross, elicits a mixture of guilt and pity. Ray Boltz wrote a popular song about the cross. Does he still feel the nails every time I fail? Does he hear the crowd cry, "Crucify again"? Am I causing him pain? Then I know I've got to change. I just can't bear the thought of hurting him. This is the way many feel about the cross. It's a place where we need to pity Jesus. Look at his blood. Look at his tears. Look how lonely he is. He needs our help. If only I'd been there, I would have done something to help you, Jesus. Yes, Jesus deserves our pity and sympathy. The truth is that Jesus doesn't need our pity. We need his. The purpose of the Passion is not to make us feel sorry for Jesus, but to show us what great lengths God goes to show compassion and pity for us. As Jesus hung on the cross, bloody, pierced, his chest heaving for breath, here is what he managed to wheeze out: "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Even in his weakest moment, Jesus had pity on us. As he was being led to his execution, he turned to those following him and said, "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children." He had pity on the families living in Jerusalem because they understood so little about what his death would mean for them. Jesus does not need our sympathy or pity. When we look at the cross, this is what it demands: our allegiance. There at the top of the cross, posted above Jesus' head in all 4 Passion accounts, is this sign: King of the Jews. When we look at the cross, we ought to tremble, not in sympathy or pity, but in such fearful reverence. What sort of Savior is able to endure a horrific death at the hands of his enemies and yet rise again? At the cross, God lifted up Jesus before the whole world, suspended between heaven and earth, as the only one powerful enough to defeat sin and death. Here is what Paul sees when he looks at the cross. "And being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. Therefore God has highly exalted him and bestowed on him the name that is above every name, so that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow, in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father." The cross is a place of pity for us. The cross is the place where God shows mercy and compassion for us. The cross is the place where we are summoned to bow the knee before the God of death and life.
criminals speak to Jesus. 2 others also, who were criminals, were led away to be put to death with him. When they came to the place that is called the Skull, they crucified Jesus there with the criminals, one on his right and one on his left. Then Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." And they cast lots to divide his clothing. And the people stood by watching, but the leaders scoffed at him, saying, "He saved others. Let him save himself if he is the Messiah of God, his chosen one." The soldiers also mocked him, coming up and offering him sour wine and saying, "If you are the king of the Jews, save yourself." There was also an inscription above him, "This is the King of the Jews." One of the criminals who were hanged there kept deriding him and saying, "Are you not the Messiah? Save yourself and us." But the other rebuked him, saying, "Do you not fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation? And we indeed have been condemned justly, for we are getting what we deserve for our deeds. But this man has done nothing wrong." Then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come in your kingdom." And he replied, "Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise."
Jesus speaks to Mary and John. Meanwhile, standing near the cross of Jesus were his mother and his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing beside her, he said to his mother, "Woman, here is your son." Then he said to the disciple, "Here is your mother." And from that hour, the disciple took her into his own home.
Jesus is crucified. From noon on, darkness came over the whole land until 3 p.m. And about 3 o'clock, Jesus cried with a loud voice, Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani, that is, my God, why have you forsaken me? When some of the bystanders heard it, they said, this man is calling for Elijah. At once, one of them ran and got a sponge, filled it with sour wine, put it on a stick, and gave it to him to drink. But the others said, wait, let us see whether Elijah will come save him. Then Jesus cried again with a loud voice and breathed his last. At that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth shook and the rocks were split. The tombs were also opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. After his resurrection, they came out of the tombs and entered the holy city and appeared to many. Now when the centurion and those with him who were keeping watch over Jesus saw the earthquake and what took place, they were terrified and said, truly this man was God's Son.
The Cross and the Lynching Tree by James Cone. The cross and the lynching tree interpret each other. Both were public spectacles, shameful events, instruments of punishment reserved for the most despised people in society. Any genuine theology and any genuine preaching of the Christian gospel must be measured against the test of the scandal of the cross and the lynching tree. Jesus did not die a gentle death like Socrates with his cup of hemlock. Rather, he died like a lynched black victim or a common black criminal in torment on the tree of shame. The crowd shout, "Crucify him," anticipated the white mob shout, "Lynch him." Jesus' agonizing final cry of abandonment from the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me?" was similar to the lynched victim Sam Hose's awful scream as he drew his last breath, "Oh my God, oh Jesus." In each case, it was a cruel, agonizing, and contemptible death. The lynching tree, so strikingly similar to the cross on Golgotha, should have a prominent place in American images of Jesus' death, but it does not. In fact, the lynching tree has no place in American theological reflections about Jesus' cross or in the proclamation of Christian churches about his passion. The conspicuous absence of the lynching tree in American theological discourse and preaching is profoundly revealing, especially since the crucifixion was clearly a first-century lynching. In the lynching era from 1880 to 1940, white Christians lynched nearly 5,000 black men and women in a manner with obvious echoes of the Roman crucifixion of Jesus. Yet these Christians did not see the irony or contradiction in their actions. The cross can heal and hurt. It can be empowering and liberating, but also enslaving and oppressive. There is no one way in which the cross can be interpreted. I offer my reflections because I believe that the cross, placed alongside the lynching tree, can help us to see Jesus in America in a new light, and thereby empower people who claim to follow him to take a stand against white supremacy and every kind of injustice. Unfortunately, during the course of 2,000 years of Christian history, the symbol of salvation has been detached from any reference to the ongoing suffering and oppression of human beings. like Ignacio Ellarusia, the Salvadoran martyr, called the crucified peoples of history. Rather than reminding us of the cost of discipleship, it has become a form of cheap grace, says Dietrich Bonhoeffer, an easy way to salvation that doesn't force us to confront the power of Christ's message and mission. Until we can see the cross and the lynching tree together, until we can identify Christ with a re-crucified black body hanging from a lynching tree, there can be no genuine understanding of Christian identity in America and no deliverance from the brutal legacy of slavery and white supremacy.
A benediction for Good Friday. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Oh, dear God, we are in darker places than we've ever known, than we've ever wanted to be. Our usual strategies of coping aren't working. We are lost. We are afraid. We are fresh out of answers. O God, light the way for this whole heart-heavy earth, for the helpless and hopeless, for those drowning in grief or fear or depression, for the tired and harried and at the end of their rope, for those weary of their sins and those who aren't, and for me too. God, have mercy. Christ, have mercy. Spirit, have mercy. The thick of dusk has fallen, and betrayal seems the order of the day. The night when love itself was handed over to brutal ignorance and cunning that loves deceit. O God, you chose to feel what we feel, to be spit on, ridiculed, tortured, and to die all alone. In your outstretched arms on the cross, are you gathering to yourself every hideous thing, every failure, travesty, and wrong? Blessed are we who say, yes, take this pain, turn things right side up again. I can see only now that you will follow me to the end and beyond. The day love died, something new was born. And may we be a people open to the grief, the loss, and then, yes, the rising of the sun.
Why is Good Friday good? Good Friday is good because the price we couldn't pay got paid, and the stain we couldn't clean got clean. Good Friday is good because the world was without hope, but the Lamb was without blemish. Good Friday is good because the worst thing that could ever happen was simultaneously the best thing that would ever happen. Good Friday is good because on that cross, on that day, the great shepherd of the sheep walked through the valley of the shadow of death for us. Good Friday is good because even though the cross isn't pretty, it's beautiful. Good Friday is good because we have a king who would rather die for his enemies than kill them. Good Friday is good because I am not good, but he is. Good Friday is good because Friday is not the end of the story.